Part 2 of Climate Incorporated by George O. Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2. Chapter 5. Summary Weather. Hendy scowled at his pair of henchmen. It was very early in the morning, and both Howardson and Blackman were still blinky with sleep, whereas Hendy looked sharp despite his corpulence.
"You're a pair of half-wits," he sneered. "We were caught, and you were caught dead to rights."
"So now what happens?"
"If they chase you to me, there'll be the devil to pay."
Both men paled a bit. The devil they did not fear, but Hendy was a different matter. They would take their chances with Satan.
"It's a bust," said Hendy, "and you're it."
"But look, boss."
"Shut up," snapped Hendy. "You're both going to jail."
"But, boss, you promised us protection,"
Blackman protested. Hendy speared Blackman with a cold eye.
"It'll keep you quiet, too," he said.
"But—"
"I keep hearing you say nothing except but,"
said Hendy in a scornful voice.
"I don't like it. It interrupts my thinking. If I hear that word again, you'll be sorry."
There was no interruption this time.
"Now you fools got caught. I'm now so deep in this publicly that I can't disclaim you. However, bright gentlemen, you stole that gadget on your own hook and sold it to me as your own idea, see?"
"We see."
"Believing that I had every right to the thing, I went ahead. You criminals, you thieves, you blackguards, you will go to jail for your temerity. You will, of course, continue to receive your salary, and, so soon as I am elected governor, I'll see that you are released on some sort of pretext, pardon or parole."
"I suggested that we might sell it to you once we got it," said Howardson in an oily manner. "Blackman planned the way to steal it."
"Check."
Hendy pressed a button, and a secretary entered.
"Miss Altman, please call the police and have an officer sent up at once."
"Trouble, Mr. Hendy?"
"Yes, indeed," thundered Hendy. "These fine pair of intellects believe that they could steal an invention and palm it off as their own."
"What crooks!" said the secretary. "I always thought they had dishonest faces. Aren't you afraid to be left alone with them?"
Hendy stood up and towered over the pair.
"I can handle them," he stormed.
The pair of worthies were handcuffed and under the watchful eye of an officer when Jim Tennis, Governor Morris, and State's Attorney Jones entered the office. Hendy nodded and pointed to Howardson and Blackman.
"Are these the gentlemen who stole your invention?" demanded he.
Jim Tennis shrugged. "They are the same pair I had the fight with."
"The circumstantial evidence is overwhelming," Hendy said with a smile. "No one knows whether they took the idea, but they were stealing something from your place, and they were selling something to me that sounds very much like it came from your place. Officer, take them away."
Tennis looked askance at Morris. The governor shrugged.
"There remains only a matter of the settlement of honor between Mr. Tennis and myself," said Hendy. "Surely Mr. Tennis must admit that I have been operating in good faith."
Attorney General Jones cleared his throat.
"I doubt very much that any evidence could show that you have not," he said dryly. "You sound as though such evidence may have been concealed," Hendy said stiffly. "Not at all," said the state's prosecutor. "My statement was merely that finding such evidence would be most difficult. You are assuming that such evidence does not exist."
"Furthermore," said Jim Tennis, "this situation evolves into a situation where I must either accept your good faith or darn soon prove otherwise, give just cause, and so forth. Right?"
"You place me in a very embarrassing position," complained Hendy. "I should like to prove conclusively, but I believe my scientifically minded young friend here will admit that negative evidence is seldom conclusive. It is almost impossible to prove the absence of anything, right?"
"Correct."
"There remains the settlement,"
said Hendy suavely, but appearing quite sincere.
"I believe it only fair that my investment be protected in some way. After all, I spent a considerable sum of money in this philanthropy. Oh," he said quickly as he saw dubious expressions starting to form, "please do not indicate that you think me idiotic. If this scheme works, and the state of Minnesota is maintained at summer temperature all winter, I shall happily give my investment to the state of Minnesota. I shall make my return out of similar machines, erected at a profit for every state in the Union requiring one. This shall become worldwide eventually."
He smiled at the nods of agreement.
"However, I find that this invention is not my own," he went on. "It rightfully belongs to my young friend Tennis. It shall be his. I only ask one favor. I ask that it be known that I did and do and will hand over to the state of Minnesota this machine, built out of my own funds from the plans of its inventor, James Tennis. I am, you see," he said, spreading his hands wide, "offering nothing that I rightfully own for the sake of my reputation."
"How about the money?" asked Jim.
"A considerable sum,"
nodded Hendy.
"but a sum I can afford, so long as it is not too well known that Charles Hendy was taken over by a pair of confidence men."
Governor Morris nodded perceptibly. State's Attorney Jones lifted an eyebrow, as though to ask what Hendy had under cover. Jim Tennis shrugged. "All you ask is that it be known that I supplied the plans instead of those two thugs?" Jim mused.
"That is all,"
said Hendy.
"Otherwise, James Tennis, things are as they seem. They were your plans. It was my money. Clear?"
"Okay," said Jim. As they left the office, Jim envisioned selling his idea to the Earth and felt that losing one machine was small enough loss, since he had not paid for it. After they left the office, Charles Hendy began cursing Howardson and Blackman for their stupidity in losing for him the makings of a fortune, but then he was planning to control it anyway. After all, a machine of that potency could and would control countries. He who controlled the Tennis climate machine would control the Earth. Winter came. It came like its usual cold fury to the rest of the United States and Canada. A standard, normal, nasty winter. Michigan Boulevard in Chicago was hit with lake blizzards. Fountain Square in Cincinnati was piled with drift snow. The streets of Manhattan were mixed mud and snow, which prompted one of the daily newspapers to invent a new word, smud, to describe it. Boston was a snow-piled city from one end to the other. But Minnesota was a verdant, semi-tropical garden land. From the center, where it was downright hot, the temperature dropped gently as the edge of the vast circle was approached. At the very edges, where the blowing winds came into the charmed circle, the air was brisk and cool. It is improper to say that immigration set in. Immigration had been high ever since the announcement of tropical heat. People who ordinarily went to Florida for the winter went to Minnesota. In fact, people who lived in Florida and California and Bermuda all the year round went across ice-strewn fields of winterland to visit the oasis of warmth. Scientists came by droves, scientists who came to measure and calculate and predict, and scientists who came to enjoy a vacation. And each state sent its own representatives to see what could be done about buying the same for their own states. There were the standard proportion of crackpots and religious fanatics who claimed that God, or their own particular personal deity, would most certainly visit his anger upon those who insisted upon tampering with that which was his domain. No one paid any attention to them, but they were there. There were also a number of people who left Minnesota because they enjoyed a cold winter. They were not missed. Christmas was green, and not the usual dull green of the occasional green Christmas of other years. This was a lush green Christmas, with farmers watching waving fields of grain while their sons cut the Christmas tree in shirt sleeves. Cattle grazed on verdant pastures while the Christmas carols were being sung, and mothers were forced to explain lamely that Santa Claus had his sleigh equipped with wheels so that he could come as usual. He did arrive, too, because with an extra crop the farmers were well equipped with that necessary essential with which to buy gifts, while the city dweller prospered due to the great influx of visitors, guests, and people who had something either to buy or sell. By contrast, moving picture lovers went home through snow and ice, grumbling because the newsreel gave a large piece of film devoted to the glorious climate enjoyed by the people of Minnesota on Christmas Day. In the governor's mansion, Jim Tennis caught Patricia Morris under the mistletoe. This was lip service to the custom in all entendre of the phrase. It might be dramatic to give an account of their first kiss, but Patricia hung the mistletoe with non-malice aforethought, and carefully and brazenly stood there, with parted lips, waiting. Jim required absolutely no signposts, and it is equally true that Jim required absolutely no mistletoe either. It was just a conventional nod to custom, was that mistletoe. Chapter 6. A Cold Surprise. An hour later, Jim arose from the chairs where they had been sitting without the mistletoe and handed Patricia to her feet. He felt in an inner pocket and came up with a small envelope. "Tickets," he said, "and curtains at 8 o'clock." Patricia nodded.
4 minutes to repair my face, she said, and I'm ready.
As they were approaching the front door of the governor's home, Governor Morse himself came driving up in a furious haste, skidded his car to a stop at the bottom of the stairs, and leapt out. Up the stairs he came, 2 at a time, hurled the front door open, and saw Patricia and Jim. Then he took a deep breath and said, "Thank God!"
"Why do you say that, Dad?" Patricia asked.
"Look, kids," he said as soon as he caught his breath. "I don't want to do this. I'm in your favor all the way."
"But what?" asked Jim suspiciously.
"You two mustn't go out this evening," Morris said.
"But why?"
Morris shook his head. "I don't like it," he said. "Don't like what?"
The governor looked at Jim with a hurt smile.
"Jim, my boy, believe me, you have my blessing, and so help me, I think you can handle her. But this thing is above it, hang it. I must ask your indulgence on the whim of an old man."
"What's going on, Pop?" demanded Patricia.
"The Sentinel has me, us, across a barrel," blurted Morris.
"Huh?"
The governor took out a tabloid daily and opened it to the editorial page. They read, "Political move? Governor Morris is an astute politician. Never unwilling to give his constituents the best that is available, Governor Morris is politically intelligent enough to give them the best at the best time for his own political future. Witness the clever manner in which the Hendy Tennis climate machine was handled. A wonder of the age, it has been presented to the people of Minnesota. But by whom? Certainly the fact that James Tennis and Miss Patricia Morris are firm friends and that a wedding is rumored to be impending should be a sign enough that Governor Morris was aware of his daughter's friend and the kind of work he was doing. Could Governor Morris have been waiting for an election year before unveiling this eighth wonder of the world? This is unanswerable. It is rendered unanswerable only because thieves broke into the secret laboratory of James Tennis and sold his invention to a man who accepted it in good faith to present it to the state of Minnesota. We believe that Charles Hendy is to be given every credit for giving the people the best, regardless of when it turns up. But it would have been a smart political move. Or do we assume that James Tennis and the governor's family are more closely attached to one another than most persons are aware?" Said Jim.
"Oh, Pop," cried Patricia, "it's so unjust."
"That's it, kids," said Governor Morris, "and it ain't good. If they see you two together tonight, everybody's going to be oversensitive about this editorial. I hate to ask you, but this is not only a game I'm playing. I'm running a life's work, and I believe that I am protecting the state of Minnesota against a very clever politician. If Charles Hendy runs for election, we'll know it." "Conniving Hendy," snarled James Tennis. "What a trickster. I hope he burns his fingers." "Okay, Pop. We'll not parade ourselves tonight. We'll stay in, Jim. There'll be other nights." January wore into February, and people grinned at one another on Groundhog Day and told one another that they did not mind the clear bright sky, for they could stand the delayed spring so long as the remaining winter were no worse than it had been. Other sections of the country gritted their teeth in snow and ice at the newsreels that showed a girl wearing a swimsuit in a green flowery garden petting a groundhog. February went into March, which came in like a hibiscus and went out like a hyacinth, and into April, which had somewhat the appearance of a drowned rat. Unusual weather, they called it. And the Sentinel editorials harped on the governor's sly political move that had failed. These editorials seemed to be timed after each date between Jim Tennis and Patricia.
While Jim was swearing about being as big a political football as his machine, the great sphere in the center of the state continued to pour out its warmth. It was turned off now, for spring was approaching, and soon the external temperature would be approaching that enjoyed within the state. This was done at the suggestion of meteorologists, who pointed out that one of the tempering factors of a warm summer was the thermal energy necessary to raise the frozen land to a summer heat. Thermal input from Sol being thermal input per se, they feared that the rise from 0 odd to 90 degrees as normal might become a rise from 90 degrees to 180 odd. Accordingly, the machine was turned off. April passed into May, and May turned blithely into June. It was noticeably cooler now, for the machine had stopped pouring its heat into the ground and the air. And on the 15th of June there came a chill spell and a faint flurry of snow. Hastily the machine was turned on. But the flurry of snow became a blizzard. Snow swamped Minnesota from end to end. For 4 days it snowed, and icicles hung from tree and wire and roof. A hasty message was sent to the climate machine, and there was no answer. Then Jim Tennis was sent for, and a group started to head for the machine. Minnesota became colder, and as they approached the site of the machine, the weather became more bitter. It was polar climate by the time they approached to within 10 miles of the machine, and the expedition sent back for polar equipment. It was flown in on ski-equipped planes, and the expedition, for it had become that, continued. Almost topped by a mighty snowdrift, the shining silver-plated ball seemed to rest atop the snow. Considering that the tower was a full 600 feet tall, the snowdrift was staggering. The expedition stopped. The biting cold from the sphere was noticeable. Tennis shook his head. "So," he said. Roberts, one of the technicians sent along with Jim, nudged his elbow. "What's with the gang running the thing?" "When you're buried under 600 feet of snow," said Jim, "you're in trouble, especially when the house below was made of summer flimsy. They had an air-conditioning unit, remember, but not a heater in the place." Roberts took off his hat solemnly. Then his face hardened, and he said, "I was about to accuse them of turning the machine on backwards." Jim shook his head. "Unless they know more about that than I, it's impossible," he said. "There's more to this than meets the eye. Confound it, there can't be any power entering that machine." "That's what the power line company claimed," admitted Roberts. "But what do we do now?" "We can't drill down through 600 feet of ice and snow," said Jim. "The lower layers are probably packed into solid ice by the pressure." Roberts looked at the naked ball of silvery metal. "Why isn't that thing encrusted with ice?" he asked. "That thing is much colder than the freezing point," said Jim, "and it is radiating cold. A drop of water coming down would freeze solid long before it hit, and when it hit, the droplet of ice would glance off. So what do we do?" "We can cut the cables below it," said Jim. "That won't take much burrowing." The caterpillar treads of the polar gear fought with the bank of snow and dug in deep, for it was not true snow, but hard frozen sleet beneath their treads. Droplets too cold to form snow crystals, they had landed and stayed there like a myriad of minute, irregular ball bearings. A few yards below the surface, they were welded together by the pressure, however, and the polar equipment hurled great fountains out in mighty arcs as they plowed their way along. With heaters going at full blast, the polar machines approached the sphere. "Notice that the warmer place is between the heaters and the sphere?" asked Tennis. "And on one side only?" "Yeah, but why?" Jim smiled wryly. "You can't properly state that anything is radiating cold. Cold is but the absence of heat. You cannot radiate the absence of anything. But confound it, you can attract and absorb a positive thing. That sphere is drawing the heat from everything. Despite the fact that the heaters are supposed to radiate in all directions, all of their thermal energy is being drawn toward the sphere, like air being drawn into a vacuum." "How are you going to cut that connection?" demanded Roberts, after thinking the previous statement over for a moment. "It's not too hard," said Jim. "We're going to drive our plow blade right through it." Under the tower they went. under the shining sphere and at the central cable that ran from the generating equipment below to the radiating sphere. There was but a minor shock as the rotating blade hit the cable, and a lurch as some of the cable wound itself in the rotating blade and tried to lift the plow. Then the machine settled once more, and as they emerged on the far side, Jim pointed to a 30-foot length of cable wound in the blade. "Any power that can get across that gap," he said. His voice trailed away in wonder, for the sphere was still drawing the heat from the heaters. "What can we do now?" Roberts asked. Jim shook his head. "Dynamite," he said with gritted teeth. 1 hour later, and from a safe distance, they watched the vast sphere of metal distort, burst into segments like a crushed orange, blast outwards like an exploded basketball, and throw curved shards of itself in all directions. A depression formed below the site in the snow, and where the sphere had been, there was nothing. Nothing? Nothing but an invisible sphere, invisible and intangible, that continued to suck heat from everything that possessed an erg. They delineated the sphere and discovered it to be the same size as the metal one had been. But they could not remove nothing. The expedition turned and fled. Chapter 7. Cut back in time. When the expedition got back to the state capital, Jim Tennis hurried to the governor's mansion. "That," said Jim Tennis to Governor Morris, "is what I've been fearing. Why, I wanted to test the thing thoroughly before announcing it. It wouldn't have really shown in my laboratory tests, for I did not set the pilot model up until late in the winter. I was prepared to wait 1 solid year, however, before making the invention public." "But why?" asked Governor Morris. "I don't know," said Jim helplessly, "but it should really fix Charles Hendy's clock." "Think about it tomorrow," suggested Morris. "You're tired. Take it easy for a night and go work on it in the morning." Jim nodded wearily. He was suddenly aware of the toll that the expedition had taken. He would work better for a few hours of relaxation. He smiled in a wan way at Patricia, who smiled at him affectionately. Jim relaxed, but in the same city Charles Hendy was not relaxing one bit. In his office he had several newspaper reporters, and he was working hard at being a politician. "I'm perplexed, gentlemen," he said. "Mr. Hendy, you started this in good faith?" "Of course. I'd as soon cut off my arm as bring this disaster to Minnesota." Moran of the Sentinel asked,
"Is it possible that James Tennis might have known what would happen?"
Hendy blinked, a well-planned blink.
"You are suggesting that Howardson and Blackman may have been in the employ of the Morris Tennis gang?"
"I am merely hypothecating."
"I'd hate to accuse anyone of that,"
said Hendy modestly. His reply was made in such a manner that everybody present knew that what he meant was that he merely lacked proof.
"Offering a political rival a weapon with which he can commit political suicide is not a new idea," said the reporter, operating on a well-laid plan.
"No?"
"I understand that there is to be a grand jury investigation," said Moran.
"It will find me blameless," said Hendy. "But perhaps it will fix the responsibility. I feel like a helpless pawn, or perhaps an unwilling and ignorant executioner. I think perhaps Howardson and Blackman should be questioned."
"Thank you, Mr. Hendy. Now I must leave because I gotta make a deadline," said Moran.
"You other gentlemen may remain if you wish," smiled Hendy. "If you wish to cover Mr. Moran's deadline to prevent a news scoop, you may use the telephones here."
In a corner of the room there was a portable bar and sandwiches on a table. The idea intrigued the reporters, and after using the telephones, they fell to with a will, which gave Moran of the Sentinel plenty of time to drive to the prison where Howardson and Blackman were incarcerated for their little trick. Moran asked for Blackman, and when the prisoner came, Moran started questioning.
"I understand that there is to be a grand jury investigation." "Oh?" answered Blackman. "It is suggested that perhaps you were a cohort of James Tennis." "Perhaps." "And if so, you offered Hendy this devilish machine as a bit of bait, hoping he would commit political suicide?"
Blackman smiled.
"Could be."
For a few seconds the reporters stared at Blackman. Then one of them said,
Then, of course, Jim Tennis is the real crook, and Governor Morris is as low a criminal as he is. How on earth did he coerce you? Blackmail? Might be, Blackman nodded. But what of Hendy? Charles Hendy thinks only of the people. How could he possibly have known that he was being bilked? He is a great philanthropist, not a scientist. Besides, the machine rightfully belongs to James Tennis, you know. It is his, and he can have it. I think I know what you mean. Mind if my friend Howardson is told of the later developments? No, said Moran, keeping a very straight face. He's a most interested party. Perhaps Tennis had something on him, too. I'll ask him, said Blackman. The grand jury investigation started. The word of a felon is not too well accepted, yet there was the suspicion of a doubt, and they worked at it thoroughly. In the grand jury room, Jim Tennis fumed and swore at their damning testimony, even though it was based on the word of felons. The trouble was that Howardson and Blackman had been convicted of felony carried out by them. To have them point out someone high up who had aided the plot gave their story an aura of truth. Being no scientists, nor directly involved in politics, there had been some question as to why a pair of felons would take the time and the trouble to steal an invention when there were banks and other places to burglarize. The slightly fish aroma cleared, even though it left a bad taste in the mouth. Finally, the grand jury retired to consider the evidence. After an hour or so, they returned to the box, and the foreman gave a folded paper to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. After reading the verdict of the jury himself, the judge cleared his throat.
James Tennis, arise,
he said sternly. Jim Tennis stood up.
Regardless of motive or outcome of other men's machinations, James Tennis, there is no doubt in the minds of this jury that you are responsible for our seasonal disaster. Therefore, before returning an indictment against you for endangering the health of the people of the state of Minnesota, I ask if you have anything further to say.
Your Honor, had my plans not been stolen, this would not have happened, Jim protested.
That is no excuse for perfecting such a machine which has become a grave peril.
My invention would have been harmless had it been correctly used, retorted Jim.
Therefore, continued the judge angrily, I return this indictment against you on behalf of the grand jury of the county of—
Your Honor, said Jim Tennis loudly, before you sign that indictment, may I remind you that I cannot solve this problem from a cell?
That's true, said the judge dubiously. We are aware that you know more of this questionable scientific feat than any other man alive, so I shall revise my procedure. I shall suspend the jury's findings for a period of 10 days, during which period, James Tennis, you will direct your activities towards solving the weather problem. If at the end of that time you have produced a solution, the indictment shall be dismissed. If not, you will be tried on charges.
10 days? Gasped Tennis in baffled fury. What can any man do in 10 days? But the court was adamant, and a short while later Tennis was released, baffled and confused, to return home. All the rest of the day he worked hopelessly at the problem, beset by worry, yet trying desperately to discover the reason for the amazing variations which his weather machine had unexpectedly developed. One night Patricia found Jim sitting dejectedly before his small model, his brow creased as he stared at the vacuum tubes and high inductance coils. "I don't know, Pat," he told her. "I honestly do not know." "But what does it do?" she asked. "I don't know," he repeated. "Then how does it work? Can't you guess something from that?" "Patricia mine, I've been guessing for 8 days now, and I'm out of guesses. Work? I don't— Well, I can tell you what happens. You start with a simple circuit, like this. That's a sort of threshold circuit, a field generator, sort of. The thing that counts is the voltage at this point. As you run it up, you eventually strike a point where the heat output is at maximum. Beyond that point, it cools off again. Generally speaking, that is. It vacillates quite a bit, and on the way up, for instance, you hit several peaks and valleys, the average of which is a trend upward. Once you hit the peak, you throw in the locking circuit, which maintains the voltage on this anode at the proper value to develop the maximum output. A simple automatic bias control. This one, he continued in a puzzled voice, behaves differently. The first very few volts causes a chill, after which it gets normal and behaves as the rest of them did. I'm stumped, Patricia." Governor Morris came in with a wan smile.
"Jim, lad, any hope?"
"None," he said. "I'm licked."
"Sorry, kids, dead sorry. But I've just decided that the ambitions of an old man aren't worth ruining several young lives for."
"What do you mean?" asked Jim.
"I've prepared a statement and a complete pardon for you, Jim, absolving you from all guilt as an innocent victim of circumstances. Hendy will leap on that with both feet, but I'll not see you sacrificed."
"But blast it all, you can't do that."
"No? Well, you can't spend 10 years in the calaboose to spite a political machine. It isn't worth it."
"But we can't let them beat us."
"Forget it," said Morris, "and tell me what you've been doing."
"Trying to figure out how it works," replied Jim. "Or rather, why. I've been back and forth across all the theory and abstract ideas that I've ever had. I'm completely stuck, as baffled as Benjamin Franklin might have been if he had been shown a radio receiver and told that it ran by electricity. How and why are unanswerable so far. So," he continued unhappily, "I've been wondering where the energy came from. I've got just a few hours left before... His voice trailed away. Patricia, to keep his mind from the imminent doom, said the first thing that came to her mind. "The machine is still good, Jim," she said. "At least, it takes some of the heat of last summer and saves it over for the winter."
"Hey!"
he exploded. "Hey what?" she asked him. "Maybe it doesn't save some of last summer's heat," he said thoughtfully. "Maybe it takes the heat from next summer." "Can you prove that?" "Yes, if we can remember to shove this thing in the refrigerator all day tomorrow. That might account for the initial dip." He paused. "But that's no solution," he said. "Oh," said Patricia, "but it is." They looked at her dumbly. Patricia began to explain. Bright and early, Jim Tennis appeared in the grand jury room to address the judge. Seated up front in one of the chairs was Charles Hendy, who had gone there to witness the discomfiture of his political rivals. He was positive the indictment would be returned against Tennis. "Your Honor," said Tennis, "this is a case of the misuse of a scientific principle. The discoverer of electricity is not responsible for the deaths each year by electrocution. The inventor of the airplane cannot be held responsible for the deaths there either. I have discovered that this invention of mine actually delivers the energy which will be received by it at a later date. In other words, what happened was that last winter the machine was sending forth the energy which would be received by it the following summer. Thus, of course, when summer arrived, the summer heat had already entered the machine and had been sent back to make last winter warm when we enjoyed it. This I can prove. However, this is no solution. The solution is, of course, to rebuild the machine and tune it for the summer following. This must be done carefully so as not to make the following summer cold and bitter. If the machine is used very carefully and with considerable planning, it can accomplish the one thing that mankind has always wanted done, saving some of August's intolerable heat to diminish the rigors of January's bitter cold. We, Your Honor, are the victims of our own avarice in wanting perfect summer all winter. Moderation is the answer."
"You are a lucky young man," said the judge. "I give you a sharp judicial warning not to let dynamite lying around loose for felons to steal, and I hereby permanently dismiss the indictment returned against you 8 days ago."
The judge's voice grew thoughtful.
"But before the court is dismissed, may I ask how you prove that the machine actually drains next summer's heat to warm last winter and so forth?"
"The climate machine is actually a time machine," said Jim Tennis promptly.
"Time machine?"
exploded Hendy scornfully. Jim Tennis turned and pointed to Hendy. "The same means of proving my point indicts you, Mr. Charles Hendy. Your Honor, I have here a series of pictures taken by myself. It shows Miss Patricia Morris in her car, wrecked. It shows the path she took through the woods. It shows, ultimately, Messrs. Blackman and Howardson following her. It shows Blackman and Howardson leaving, and the route they took to get to the home of the great philanthropist, Charles Hendy."
"When were these pictures taken?"
asked the judge. Tennis grinned.
Less than an hour ago, and a year ago, both. I went back in time.
Handy, grasping for any irregularity, spoke up sharply.
Can you prove that these pictures are not faked? Just name me one proof that you were there at all. Just one. Who saw you? Who recalls you? Have you a witness?
Tennis stammered. Why, There came a gurgling cry from the rear of the courtroom. It had been uttered by Patricia Morris, who came forward with a smile. But it was a relieved smile, and there was something in her eyes that told Jim Tennis that the relief was far more personal than the facts of the trial or of any other matter at present hand. "So you," she said to Jim Tennis, "are the big lug in the overcoat, muffler, and overshoes who cradled me out of my damaged car and kissed me." Patricia turned to the judge and explained. Then, with a twinkling in her eye, she finished. "And now, Your Honor, there remains but one item to prove to my satisfaction that it is the same man. That muffler he hung over the coat rack looks the same, but might have been coincidental. Similarly, the overcoat and the overshoes. Also, other minor details, including the possible fact that the lipstick he forgot to wipe off matches my own. But there's only one man who—"
"Court dismissed!"
exploded the judge quickly. After all, what Jim Tennis was about to do might be considered in contempt of court. End of Part 2. End of Climate Incorporated by George O. Smith.